Your own rights are not being supported when you are treated differently or unequally based on one of the grounds covered by the Human Rights Code. Discrimination is when this treatment results in harm. In the context of a school, for example, the promotion process cannot take into consideration those grounds covered by the Human Rights Code. For example, age or race.
Some forms of discrimination can be actually very subtle. And so sometimes you're relying on someone's instinct to know that something is just not right. It doesn't feel right. But it's still going to be a challenge to prove that. So being involved and calling your association, they can help tease out that information.
You'll know when your own rights are not being supported, when you feel you're being treated unequally or different than others based on the grounds covered in the Human Rights Code. The Human Rights Code specifically covers contracts, employment, housing, goods and facilities, and professional associations.
When an administrator starts to feel that their own rights are being discriminated against, that they're feeling that they're not being treated fairly, then it's important that they start to they listen to that feelings and really honor those feelings that they have by calling their respective associations and having a conversation with someone from their supports, their protective services, to talk about this is what's happening, this is the situation, this is how I'm feeling. Is there something here that is a violation of the code?
When you have a human rights concern, your association can provide support and guidance for you, particularly when you work with administration at the board level, with human resources, or your board's human rights department. As well, if you were to file an application with the Human Rights Tribunal, your association will provide support and guidance through that process.
I would say that the role of the association is not only a supportive one, but it is the role of an advocate. And what I would advise in those cases, if an administrator is concerned about their own human rights, is that they notify their association sort of even as early as possible. And what typically would happen in that event is the association would act on behalf of the principal or vice principal in front of the board. And they would say, you know, here's the concern that we're having. And the concern may be a human rights concern, but it might be another concern. Like that's another reason why the association is there, sort of to discern what rights are being affected. So that's a good conversation to have, because what often happens is that an administrator doesn't quite know what's wrong. They just know something is wrong. Often what happens is administrators are scared. They're scared to say, I'm either sick, I need an accommodation, I need the following to happen, and they just want to talk to somebody about it. And then the association can intervene on their behalf and say, you're right, you do need some accommodation here, or you do need some help in sort of bringing forth your concerns. So a lot of what the association does in that case is sort of they would be discerning the information, they'd be an advisor, they'd be a supporter, but really the key piece is that they'd be an advocate with respect to the administrator and their concerns.
When an administrator feels that that they themselves are not being treated fairly, or that they may be discriminated against, it's important that the administrator recognizes those feelings, honors those feelings, and that they actually talk to their respective associations and say, this is how I'm feeling, this is what's happened, this is the specific situation. The association will ask for what documentation do you have, so that we can consult with them and make some recommendations. Is it really a violation of the code from our standpoint? And if it is, then how can we provide some advice to the member? Or is it something that it really sits outside of the code, but it's still something that it's not a good practice, and so we need to help the member deal with their board in that respect. So honoring those feelings, but at the same time, it may or may not fall within the code. An association can help the member determine where does that unfair treatment sit. Because just because it's not a code violation, it doesn't mean that it's not something that we can help support and provide advice on.
We've seen a wide variety of cases covering many things in the spectrum of the grounds from the Human Rights Code, but we've particularly seen a lot of cases that involve discrimination based on gender and family status. For ageism, we've seen, for example, people perhaps later in their career who want to try to be promoted. Sometimes it's deemed that because they're late in their career, they're not a good candidate, but really they should be considered based on their abilities and skills, not their age.
Most of the time, what you're seeing it happen, the context in which it's happening, is when there has been no promotion. It's usually, what we call a failure to promote, where they're saying I was deserving of a particular performance, I wasn't promoted because of X, Y, and Z sort of reason, which is under the code. It could be race, again, religion, ethnic origin, sort of any one of the code-related issues. So that's probably the most common area where administrators get a bit frustrated, and that's sort of, I think, what drives them to file an application. We have a couple other issues that, again, sometimes straddle human rights accommodation and also potentially discipline. And one of those things is if you have an alcohol or drug problem. And so that's something that everybody knows is something you could be disciplined for, you could be terminated for, but not necessarily. If you are a person who has an addiction, that is considered a disability under the code, and that has to be accommodated. So we're seeing that happen a little bit more and more as well in terms of supporting our administrators through those kinds of issues, because they're afraid. They're afraid to disclose this to the board. But if they don't, then they could be disciplined. So we're sort of working both sides of that in the sense that let's deal with the code-related issues and how to be accommodated, but let's also deal with your performance and sort of potential discipline. So there sometimes can even be an intersection of sort of rights and responsibilities that we're sort of advocating and intervening on as well.
It's important that administrators really gain a lot of knowledge in this area of human rights, not only for their own human rights and to make sure that they understand their own rights in situations, but also so that they can prevent situations from escalating. So knowledge is power. So really, if you feel that this is not an area that you have a lot of knowledge and expertise in, and expertise is a difficult word, but that you really don't understand a lot of the process, what are the sections of the code? How can you sometimes unwillingly be discriminating and not realizing that you are maybe not accommodating a student or a parent or someone from the community? Then talk to your local association. Ask them for some professional development in this area. You can do some reading. There are some great resources out there. You can actually look at also the website from CanLII, which has a lot of the decisions. That's where all of the decisions from tribunals are listed with the outcome of those hearings. And so those are all ways that you can do some self-directed PD, but really, at the end of the day, it's really about making yourself more knowledgeable in this specific area. This area is an area of growth. We're seeing an increase in this area, and so it would be really important that everybody really develop an increased knowledge in this specific area. So speak to your local associations, speak to your own associations at a higher level in terms of, whether it's Catholic Principals Council of Ontario, Ontario Principals Council, or ETFO, and really look at what opportunities can they do for presentations, workshops, are there books you can read, that type of thing. So I think it's really important that we really become advocates for ourselves in terms of our own professional development.
It's important for principals and vice principals to be up to date and aware of human rights issues in the province to support their own knowledge and rights. One of the things that's very important is to be on top of your own board's policies and procedures, which themselves are a reflection of the Human Rights Code. Boards work hard to make sure those policies are compliant with the Human Rights Code, so knowing what they are and knowing that things evolve over time and being on top of those issues is important, as many times issues and cases come our way that we see violations of human rights, which improves our policies and practice. So the bottom line is to stay as current as possible.
It's important that when we look at our own human rights and our rights to be treated with dignity and respect, that we understand that we are also important in that conversation. So we can't minimize our own needs and our own obligations to take good care of ourselves. And so it's really important that we become advocates of our own rights. And so by doing that, it would be through your associations and understanding what it means and to have needs that need to be accommodated, and developing that self-awareness and that knowledge. And so really being a self-directed learner means advocating on your behalf when you feel that you have a need that maybe has a gap in your learning and in your knowledge, and identifying that to your association and trying to get a workshop, some training, some additional information, anything like that that can make you a better administrator.